so I'd like to introduce our panel, have our panelists come up. I've had the pleasure of working as co-chair with Peter of Princeton Future, and Sheldon Sturgis is here, our managing director. Peter has a very long history from the very beginning here in Princeton. He grew up in Princeton and graduated from Harvard University. For 45 years, he worked for the Wall Street Journal as a reporter for correspondents in Vietnam and Asia for 12 years, editor, publisher, and chairman and CEO of the Wall Street Journal's parent company, Dow Jones. Peter won the Pulitzer Prize for coverage of the birth of Bangladesh in 1972. He's the trustee of both the Institute for Advanced Study, and as I indicated, he's a co-chair of Princeton Future. And I'd like to welcome him here and have him introduce our panelists. Thank you, Peter. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Ryan. The one thing I would add to that introduction is I'm actually the son of immigrants, in this case from Austria, and I'm also the father of two immigrants, which is to say two Korean children adopted from Korea, or Korean American now, of course. So it gives me a strong personal interest in immigration, and I'm really pleased to be part of this today. I also just wanted to join in thanking Peter Goddard, who is retiring as the director of the Institute within the next few days, although happily not from the physics faculty. So his appearing here this morning was, if not his final act as director, certainly one of the near final ones. We have 50 minutes for this panel, so we'll try to devote roughly 30 of it to some questions I can pose to the panel, or indeed they can pose to each other, and then we'll try to allow about 20 minutes for questions from the audience. I'll just keep the introductions very brief. Seifi Ghasemi is chairman and CEO of Rockwood Holdings, a publicly owned chemical company. He's a mechanical engineer, and he is himself a native of Iran. Darrell Hamill is co-founder of Princeton Power Systems and a computer scientist. Stuart Smith is Dean of Research at Princeton University and a native of Canada and a physicist. And you've already heard from Darrell West, who will be joining the panel. Okay, first question, and this one I would address to each of you. You know, you each may come to this issue of immigration from different vantage points, but could you each very briefly explain why people in your industry or institution or profession, and also why you personally attach so much importance to the issue, why you're here?
Well, Peter Goddard said a very large amount of what would be high priority for me representing the university community. So I'm frantically revising some of the remarks so I didn't bore you by repeating his. But I think it's just clear that the United States has been probably profited more than any other country throughout the 20th century from immigration. Peter's example is just telling, and there are hundreds or thousands of them. And one just example that's very local is that in one little high school in Budapest, 5 of the most famous physicists during the World War II period came out. And their names, I think you would know. One is von Neumann, who came here. Eugene Wigner, a Nobel Prize winner, came to Princeton University. Louis Szilard was the person who convinced Einstein to write the letter to Roosevelt on the atom bomb. Edward Teller, everybody knows. And we also had von Karman, a real huge pioneer in aviation and fluid dynamics. All came from this one high school in Budapest. And so the country would be different if it weren't for that, even that single high school. Now, going today, at Princeton, 2/3 of our postdocs are are on temporary visas. It turns out half of our assistant professors are on temporary visas. And if you ask the international component of those, this does not include the assistant professors who were born in other countries and have since immigrated and achieved permanent residence. So I don't know that number, but this is just typical of most research universities. And but what we're seeing is major competition from other countries that just didn't exist before. A good example of that was pointed out several times by Subhash Suresh, director of the National Science Foundation and former Dean of Engineering at MIT, a classic example himself, who was educated in one of the elite Indian institutes for technology and came to MIT for graduate study, stayed on. He's now goes back and works with them, and he says that because other countries are now developing and they have other options than the US, they're not coming to the US, whereas in his day, there was no other option. Everybody came to the US, and we can see in many industries that the contribution of people from India is just tremendous. And so you ask why? Well, I think from Princeton, our worst problem is everything derives from outstanding faculty. And just like Peter Goddard and the Institute, this is a worldwide market. We want to get the best in the world. And so the backlog and uncertainty in obtaining legal and permanent residence just puts stress on people, many of whom are at a very difficult time in their lives. And it's a huge deterrent for them. And so this is something that we really need to work on. And this can happen even at the most senior level. I've seen it when there be a dean or deans are over the hill, but sorry, not that, but a distinguished senior professor cannot come for a long time, and in many cases has decided not to bother. And so we have very time-consuming and expensive process, as has been pointed out. I was chairing the Department of Physics, and I was running a big experiment at Stanford, and I spent probably a day a week writing letters of support for people even getting H-1B visas. And you had to sort of lie. You had to say, this is the best person. The country will suffer greatly if this person isn't allowed to come in. And why are we shooting ourselves in the foot like that? Another one that's in my field is international conferences. Big international conferences with the most topical results often can't choose their speakers until rather close to the deadline, to the actual conference, because you want to get the most exciting science and the people who made the biggest contributions. Sometimes they are young, sometimes they're not well recognized, and they come from sensitive countries. International collaborations now have Iranian physicists, they have people from China and other sensitive countries. The US is now on the blacklist for many of these things. In physics, there's an International Union of Pure and Applied Physics. Said you have to make a huge case to show why having a conference of this nature in the United States wouldn't be really fail or be damaged by the inability of the best speakers to get visas in a timely fashion. So this has been pointed out for now 6 or 7 years by the National Academy, who had 2 reports. The first one was called The Gathering Storm. The second one 2 years ago was The Gathering Storm Revisited, Approaching Category 5. And then just this last week, there was a report on research universities, the future of America. And in all of these cases, there are 2 major recommendations. One is we are very weak in recruiting the number of talented and retaining the number of talented people in what they call STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics fields, and especially in recruiting underrepresented minorities and women. This is a serious problem. So that was one of their recommendations, and this has been all of these panels, is you've got to do something about this. The second one is that you've got to make it possible for international people to come and join us. We cannot do without them as we've done. One comment, just locally, we have the National Laboratory for Fusion Research out there at Forrestal. It was the inventor of the whole field. It had the leading machines until the late 90s. And now we find that we have still the world's expertise in this field. Every other country wants our people to come and train them and work with them. but we have no big machines being built. China, Japan, Korea, and Europe all have budgets 2 or 3 times ours. And so this expertise, once transferred, we will not be needed, and this is going to be another field. There are similar examples in other fields, particle physics, lots of others where not only the funding but the competition from other countries is changing the playing field. Now, as a dual citizen, I'd just like to say a couple of contrasts. When I lived up in Canada many, many years ago, Canada was a stepping stone to the US. There was a dreadful brain drain problem because it was easier to get into the US from Canada than from many other countries. People would come there, and as soon as they could leave, they did. That's now changed completely in that you find now, if anything, there's a drift towards Canada from the United States, and certainly it and other countries like Australia in particular, which is benefiting from the Asian development, are very fierce competitors. Just as a joke, I thought I would see if I could immigrate to Canada. So I looked last night on the Canadian immigration website. It's electronic, and you just click and skill-based priorities. And they also have an entrepreneur class, a venture capital class, and those with higher education in fields of national need. I figured that's what I might have a chance in. There's a maximum score of 100 based on the level of your education, your age, your language fluency in French and English, and whether you have a job offer in a field of national need. And the companies are encouraged to make these job offers before the immigration process starts. So, okay, I got 89 out of 100. Passing grade is 67. Lost 10 points because I'm old, and 1 because I can only read and speak French with moderate success, and I'm not completely fluent. Now, if you look at the same thing for entrepreneurs in other cases, it's very similar, and they're just eating our lunch. One example that shocked me, I'm from the West Coast, Victoria and Vancouver, is that Microsoft, of course, is based in Seattle, but they've opened a big place in Vancouver now because they can get people there because of immigration. And they also don't have other worries like export controls, ITAR, and all of these other things. And so we see that there are a lot of, it used to be that Canada had these branch plants where they were just providing the lower level stuff, but now we see a switch there where people are, now this is not bad, this is a part of globalization, but when you put it right next to Seattle for Microsoft, it's sort of suggesting maybe there's an artificial border. So anyway, that's, I think the things that were mentioned about what's happening, the Staple Act for allowing, giving green cards to PhDs, there's a Mission China program where Chinese scientists will be given visas regularly and easily, and the other ways of encouraging entrepreneurs. A system doesn't sound so different than what's already in place, Canada, Australia, and many other countries. So I hope that we can go that way to retain our necessary innovation. The only way we're going to compete in standard of living is by innovation. U.S. does that better than anybody, but the other people are trying to catch up. Thanks.
Thanks, Stuart.